Here I am at the halfway mark. It's time for Grandmother's Choice. This is block number 6. Hooray! So I've picked out my fabric. I've got a nice purple to go along with my background. Yay! That's going to be a super little block, isn't it? And I also have all of those other yummy colors back there that are going to be the last 6 blocks. Just enticing. Anyway, so I'm going to open up this piece of purple and see how I'm going to cut the blocks. I always like to make use of my fabric. Here I need 9 4.5-inch background, 8 half square triangles, those are the 5-inch ones, and 8 color blocks. I try to make the best use out of my fabric without wasting it. Easy to cut, just strips of 4.5 and then just take off the amount that you need for each one of the blocks. And because my background fabric stays the same for all of the blocks, I don't mind cutting a few extra 4.5-inch strips the width of the fabric. They will get used up before the end of this quilt. I'm not worried about that. Now, I'm going to just take my time and cut all the squares. I also have cut a 5-inch strip of background fabric, and that will be for the half square triangles. It's always easier to just sort of work away at them one at a time, make sure they are cut accurately, and make sure that I have enough. Some of my color fabrics have more amount than others, and I've been sort of peeking ahead at some of the next blocks in the series, and I have one piece of fabric over there that there isn't very much of, and so I'm going to use it in one particular block that requires the fewest number of color squares. But for now, I have really enjoyed making this quilt and the blocks so far. Every time I come to a place that has a bit of selvage, I always cut that off. I keep the pieces of selvages in a small little bin, and I have a friend who's making selvage bags and selvage quilts, and I give them to her. And she really enjoys the fact that I give her some of the salvages that I get. Cutting the background fabric is quite easy. Most of it is just 4.5 or 5-inch strips, and I have a significant amount of yardage. I don't really have to worry about running out of the background fabric, I think. But anyway, the other color fabrics that I'm using, some of them are the whole width of the fabric. Some have been fussy cut and things are cut out of them. And some of them are just a square that are left over. This particular purple one is the width of fabric, and it's about 12 inches wide. So I still want to make good use of the fabric. I first of all measured what I've got, and I'm cutting 2 4.5-inch blocks first of all from the cross cut, and then I'm going to make a long cut on the width of the fabric, so that I can get the best use of the fabric without wasting too much. The parts that are left over will go back into my scrap bins, and I will use them for other things. I don't usually have too much waste. That little piece that I just cut off will get put into a bin for making something. It doesn't go in the garbage. When I'm tossing it away, it's not going into the garbage unless it's just little tiny slivers. Most of the things I cut up, I have a good use for them down the road, but they're going to get used. So here I am. I'm going to make a cut about 10 inches, fold that back, and then I will have the section right there. I'm going to cross cut that to make my 5-inch squares. And the reason I made that first cut, 2-inch cut, is to keep that strip along the side as a long strip piece, which can be used for a lot of different things, rather than little tiny pieces that I don't have as many uses for. So I am a little bit careful about the things that I am cutting up. Even though they're smaller pieces, I still don't want to waste them. So there I have my 5-inch squares for the half square triangles. Then I just have to finish cutting the 4.5 inches. And I'll just do a row the length of that fabric now, and that will give me enough to make my 4.5 inch squares that I need. See, I'm counting them up, counting it up in my head. When I count in my head, my lips move. So there I've got the 4.5 inch squares all cut. I just tidy up the board a little bit, move my ruler, and now it's time to make the half square triangles. First of all, I lay out the wrong side of one of the fabrics and draw a diagonal line with my long ruler. Most of the time I use a chalk pencil, but today I just happened to pick up a lead pencil. It doesn't really make a difference on this fabric because that's the line I'm going to be cutting on, and it won't show on any of the fabrics. So when I have all 4 of those diagonal lines drawn, I will place the background fabric underneath, right sides together with the colored pieces of fabric, and I will make sure that they are aligned properly and take them to the sewing machine. And here I will stitch on either side of the line, then cut on the line, and these are all pressed out and finished. And I just make sure that I take my square up ruler and make sure that they are squared properly. Sometimes just little bits of fabric can make a big difference when you're trying to line up squares, especially if they are on the bias. And I also like to cut off those little corners that that pop up after you sew 2 triangles together. It makes it a lot easier to chain piece if those little corners are gone. So I take the time, and every time I have a half square triangle, I will just take the time and square them up so that they are the correct size. Most of the time there's not much waste, just a little bit of trimmings. And that I do put in my recycling bin. I don't save those. There's a limit to what I'm going to save. I don't save those. Anyway, now the next thing is laying out my blocks. I just take the time, follow my diagram, and make sure that I put all of the blocks in the correct place, so I can just pick them up and take them to the sewing machine in the correct order. Move everything out of the way. These are big blocks. They really take up a whole tabletop to lay out those colors in the correct order. But it's so much fun when you get to this stage and you just see, oh wow, that's going to go together really quickly. It's nice to watch. Sometimes it's just easy to put blocks together. I could have I really could have made those double blocks as one rectangle, but I learned with the second block or the third block that it's easier to chain piece all of the units when they're all the same size and not have to deviate from that. So I've started making them all their 4.5 inch squares rather than trying to be smart and do a 12.5 by 4.5. It's it's sort of pushing the easy button, I think, but it makes it easier to sew for me. So there you are. Almost the pieces are almost there. I have to make sure I get those triangles in the right orientation so that I have at least a chance of getting them in the right order when I sew them. I think almost every time I sew something together, I have to do something about removing some stitches and turning things over. You see that one I just laid out on the table? I laid it the wrong way. I can see it when I'm looking at the video now. I've got it backwards. And you know, when I was doing it, I don't think I saw it because I remember sewing that together and then having to take it out. I wish I could tell myself, turn that thing around. I just look so happy making that. All right, it's time to sew. I just pick up two, sew them together. When I get to the end of that one, I turn around and get the next two and sew them together. Fold one over on top of the other, pick it up, stitch it right in without cutting the thread at the end of the stitch. Just keep chain piecing them together. I really like the colors that I'm choosing for the fabrics to go along with this background fabric. This block in particular kind of makes me smile. My sister is a red hat lady, and this block would be right up her street. She loves red and purple things together. And, you know, I don't mind red and purple together, but I am not a red hat lady. I like the green block that I made, and I like the blue block that I made, and the orange one. They're all very colorful and bright. I think I just like bright colors. Anyway, here I am. I'm just working away and sewing these pieces together. The next thing will be just to give it a good press, and then it will be done. But I must tell you that soon after this I sewed that block that was in the wrong orientation, and I just went ahead, picked it up the way it was, and I sewed it in because I thought it was all correct. I had to stop and I had to take it out and restitch it. And the second thing that happened, I ran out of thread again. And not the bobbin thread this time. I ran out of thread on the top. I didn't even notice it. I had a whole row sewed, and I picked them up to turn on and do the next one, and none of them were sewed together. You would think that you'd see that when you're sewing. There's no stitching happening. But I was just happily stitching along, and there wasn't any thread coming down. It was a bit of a laugh fest, but I got it done. I'm just going to swap my video now and go ahead. So I always find it's a good idea to keep the workspace tidy and put things away when I'm done. It's interesting to see how many things get left on the desk. Sometimes I have stashes of bits of pieces. I'm working on something else, and it gets in the way. So if you have a chance to keep your desktop tidy and keep things in order, it's very helpful to be able to have a good sewing technique. When I was a teacher, I would always emphasize to the students to keep their workspaces clear, because one time one of my students sewed part of her dress that she was wearing into the garment she was sewing. And she lifted it off of the sewing machine table, and her arm moved with it because the frill of the sleeve that she was wearing got stitched right into the sewing machine project she was working on. And did we ever have a good laugh about that? We had to cut her out. We had to unpick the stitches so she could go home. It was really funny. Anyway, and it's good practice anyway. I for a while when I was going to university, I worked in factories, and if you had any kind of sleeves that could get caught in the machinery, you were chastised by the people who are in control, making sure that you didn't have any industrial accidents getting pulled into the machinery. So you had to be careful with the type of clothing that you wore there. At one time, I was sewing seat covers for American Motors cars, and the sewing machines that we were using didn't have safety guards for many of the tasks that we had to complete. And honestly, that was one of the scariest industrial areas I have ever worked in. Every once in a while, you'd hear somebody sewing over their fingers, and it was really, really awful. There you see, I just noticed the problem. I'm going to hold it up and see. You can pick out the problem area right there. I sewed it, and I sewed it, and I sewed it, and look at the look on my face. I'm just so gobsmacked that I did that. But it happens to everybody sooner or later. So once again, the stitch ripper comes out, and away I go. I'll get it fixed, and then I'll sew the rest of the squares together. And then it will be time to press it. So through the magic of video, I am going to go, voila! There it is. It's fixed. I love this editing feature on this little iPad device that I'm using. Anyway, there we go. I'm back on course again. I just have to finish sewing the rows together. I love the fact that I always keep the side facing up that I just sewed. And that way I can tell which way I want the seam allowances to turn. One turns under, one turns over, so that you have all your seam allowances locked in place neatly. And when it comes time to press, it makes it so much easier to press the seams because they're going in opposite directions. I don't tend to press many seams open unless there's a lot of seams coming together at one spot, like when you have octagons and things like that you need to make all those seams kind of lie flat. That's a hard thing to do. But in something that's a grid pattern like this, it's easy to just put one seam allowance going to the left and the one underneath going to the opposite direction. and then they tend to lay flat at when you want to press them. And if you sew your rows so that the one that you just sewed is on the top, you can easily just manipulate the underside seam allowance so that it's going in the direction that you want it to go. It works quite well, and especially with these big blocks. It certainly is easier to press these things than having little 1.5 inch blocks. That's for sure. Anyway, here's the final row. I think that's all sewed together now. Voila, it is done sewing. And there I have my little ironing board right beside the sewing machine. I give it a spritz with my spray bottle. And that allows it to have a bit of steam, and that makes it easier for the seam allowances to really lie flat and give a good appearance to the front. Every time I make something, I try to press it well at this stage, and then later on you don't have to try to get things straight when you want to sew the blocks together. Make a block, sew it, press it really well, and one of the reasons why I like to make a project and finish it right away is because if you are doing like a block of the month, then you have to put it away for 4 weeks until you could get the next block done. You really can't leave them out. You have to put them away somewhere, and that usually involves folding them up, and then they get all creased. You have to repress everything every time you get it out. Some people use pants hangers and pin them to their board, stacked up on each other so that they don't have to do that extra pressing. I find it's just an extra tedious step to do to keep everything tidied looking. Pressing is very important at the stages when you are actually building your blocks. And if you want a long armor to quilt your quilt for you, it really requires well-pressed blocks to get a smooth finish from a long arm. Anyway, that is almost this block done. I'm just going to show you my diagram that I started with. And there it is. The block is finished. It's up on the wall with the other 5 that I completed already. Boy, look at those colors. They're just popping off the wall. You think that background fabric has a lot of color, but once you see those bright colors with it, the background fabric just blends right in, and it just sort of looks nice all together. So I'll just wait patiently for the next block. Another month, another wait. I'll check in with you later. Bye.